Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.
When I was in business for myself in Reynolds, Georgia from the mid-'70s to the late '90s, I had to do several things to make a living. As many of you know, when I was a young kid, our funeral home was behind the meat market at our grocery store. In the early '60s, my daddy moved the funeral business into the Methodist parsonage he purchased and remodeled, but he kept running the grocery store that sold much more than groceries. In the mid-'70s, we moved out of that old store that sold most everything and built a brand new modern grocery store. At the same time, we purchased another funeral home in a neighboring town. I should also mention that we were trained EMTs and ran the ambulance service for the western part of the county. My brother was a coroner for years, and after he left the family business in the late '70s to go in the preaching business, I later became coroner. Although we were now just selling groceries in the store, I kept a couple of furniture books. I maintained a relationship with a couple of furniture sales reps, and from time to time, people would still come to me to order furniture. I would order the furniture for them and add 10% to my cost, and the customer would pay the freight. In case you don't know it, furniture is marked up rather aggressively in furniture stores. They have to do that to pay for the inventory they have on the floor. Since I had no inventory, I could sell it for much less. We ended up selling the grocery business after a few years, thank God, and I eventually got out of the ambulance business. Now I was down to 2 funeral homes along with being the coroner. But I continued to sell furniture from time to time out of my 2 books, and even stepped it up a bit after getting out of the grocery business. In 1987, I hired a native Reynolds guy away from another funeral home. My brother was long gone by now, and Daddy was pretty much retired. Jeff had started with us as a kid and was glad to be back home. I noticed we were playing a lot of golf between funerals. In a small-town funeral business, the between time could get rather long. We were either completely covered up between the 2 places or having lots of time to play golf. I was pretty much paying Jeff to work at the funeral home and to play golf. I had a rather interesting idea. I was renting the majority of our original store building, the one that sold everything from Evinrude Motors to Hoop Cheese, to Bill's Dollar Store. I decided to take the back part of that store and make a furniture office to sell more furniture out of my 2 books at my cost-plus model. I had a window made into a door. Jeff and I built a large counter. I bought a few stools for ladies to sit on while they browsed through my 2 books. I had a Goddard Factory Direct Furniture sign made, and we opened for business. Our first job was to get more furniture companies to do business with us, which was not easy because the stores who actually stocked furniture would not like it if we were not stocking furniture and selling it for less than half that they sold it for. But since we were in a little town at least 40 miles from the bigger stores, I talked a few reps into letting us sell their furniture. As we started doing more and more business, the companies who would sell to us grew. We did change our model just a bit. When we opened our little office, we began charging our cost plus 15% plus the freight instead of the 10% plus freight. I also began selling furniture off the internet. This was dial-up internet and very slow, but I figured out how to make a web page, and we began shipping furniture to customers as far away as New Jersey. Almost all those customers were someone I knew or had some connection with, but it gave them a way to look at furniture without coming to our store. A very novel approach in the late 1980s and early 90s that kind of caught on later. Our furniture business grew, and now Jeff and I did not have much time for golf at all. In fact, we did most of the funeral office work at the furniture store. The townspeople knew where we were and would drop by the furniture store to pay their funeral bill or follow up after a funeral or just to visit. Most of our furniture business came from out of town. We were selling upper line furniture, none of the cheap stuff, but at extremely low prices. Another brother of mine bought a new house in Atlanta, of course, filled up his new house with furniture from us. He figured quickly how much money he saved. Next thing I knew, he had a neighbor who needed furniture in her new house. She saw George's furniture and decided to make a trip to Reynolds. By then, we had plenty of books and furniture samples for sofas and chairs and everything you can think of. We did no advertising, but word was spreading about the deals one could get at Goddard Factory Direct Furniture store in Reynolds. Jeff and I did have a few mishaps, like the time we decided to purchase a big used furniture truck to deliver furniture. We figured we could make a little on delivery. We had huge lettering put on both sides of the truck, Goddard Factory Direct Furniture. We also had a huge electric lift on the back of the truck. Late one afternoon, I got a call from Jeff. He was delivering a truckload of furniture to one of the nicest subdivisions in Atlanta. He got it unloaded and was headed back to Reynolds when the truck broke down on the interstate in downtown Atlanta in the middle of rush hour traffic. He got the truck towed to a nearby garage. I drove up, about a 2-hour drive, to the garage to get Jeff and to see what was wrong with the truck. It was a big garage and looked like a legitimate place. The guy told me that the motor would have to be replaced and he needed the money up front to do it. Like an idiot, I wrote him a check for $1,200. He said he would call us within a week to let us know when we could come get the truck. After a week, we had not heard from him. I called the number and got no answer. I kept calling the number, it just kept ringing. After a few more days, I called and the number had been disconnected. We drove back to the garage. When I looked in the building, it was completely empty. There was no sign of a garage ever being there. We found our big truck in the back. It had been completely stripped. There was nothing under the hood and our big lift was gone. I went to the police there and reported it and even chased those folks down eventually. I talked to the guy's wife a couple of times who had a baby screaming in the background and threatened her sorry husband, but I never got my money back. I think Jeff delivered furniture one more time to one of the nice suburbs in Atlanta. We had already agreed to do it with this customer, so we had to. He borrowed a cow trailer from a farmer friend and we loaded that sucker up with furniture. I can't imagine what those customers thought when Jeff pulled in the driveway of that $1 million house, delivering their furniture out of a cow trailer. We got out of the delivery business after that. Now the deal was 15% plus cost. You pay the freight and you have to come get it. That new policy did not slow our business a bit. It was not unusual for a lady from Atlanta to call for an appointment. She would drive up in her Mercedes. If we were busy at the funeral home, one of us would let her in, show her our cost sheet, give her all the books she needed and a calculator, and leave her there alone. We also left her with an order book so she could write her order on our pad along with the prices she figured out. We also gave her a key to lock the door when she was in there and when she left. We would tell her we needed a down payment of 20% to place an order. We would get back to the furniture store later and her order would be on the counter along with a big check, many times for more than the 20% of the total order. The key to the store would be under the mat at the door. Next thing you know, her friend would call for an appointment and would come down and do the same. We definitely had a unique business going, and we had fun doing it. We even got in the flooring business. We learned how to measure for carpet by trial and error. Since most of it comes in 12-foot widths, and rooms could be 16 feet or whatever, it wasn't easy figuring. There were no electronic notebooks that would figure it for you like they have today. At the beginning, Jeff and I would go to a house with 2 different measuring tapes. He would measure and I would measure. We would come back to the furniture store. He would figure and I would figure. We would then see how close we were, and if we were not close, we would compare notes and figure it out. After a while, we both got good at measuring floors. Our only overhead was $12 or so a month for the electric bill. When we sold furniture, we made money. We didn't order it until the customer ordered it. We had no inventory, and we sold a lot of furniture. It was rather simple, actually. There was one exception to the inventory policy. We sold Lane recliners. Lane would not let us sell them unless we kept at least 6 of them in inventory. We relented because we knew we could sell them. And that brings me to the purpose of this monologue about Goddard Factory Direct Furniture. An elderly couple came in one afternoon to look for a recliner. For simplicity and to protect the innocent, I will call them Fred and Wilma. I had known this couple all my life. They were just typical salt of the earth and frugal people who got that way because they had lived through the Great Depression. Wilma was taking the lead, as you might expect, but she thought Fred needed a new recliner. Fred was a little reluctant, but nevertheless, he was willing to take a look. Like I said, we had 6 of them on the floor of our little furniture office. Fred sat in each one. While Fred was seated in one, Wilma was seated in another. It appeared that Wilma would be the decision maker as to which recliner Fred would purchase. This went on for at least an hour. They both sat in all the recliners numerous times, and Wilma explained the pros and cons of each. Fred, on the other hand, was mostly quiet. To be honest, I left at one point to go to the post office and left Jeff there with them. When I got back, they still had not made a decision. Jeff and I were about to pull our hair out. You know how the elderly are. Since I am one of them now, we tend to frustrate the younger folks. Finally, and I mean finally, they chose a recliner. Wilma wrote a check for it, and I whispered to Jeff, please deliver that chair before they change their mind. Jeff followed them to their house with their new recliner. We both breathed a sigh of relief. The next morning, Jeff and I were at the furniture office when the phone rang. Jeff answered it and looked at me as he was talking. Then he said, Wilma wants to talk with you. I was thinking, oh my Lord, she has changed her mind on that dang recliner. I reluctantly picked up the phone. Bruce, Wilma said, can you come to my house? I think Fred is dead. Oh my, I told her I was on the way. When I got there, Fred had indeed passed away. Wilma was upset as I was. He seemed so healthy the day before. I couldn't help but notice, though, that he was in his new recliner. I also noticed the price tag was still hanging on the chair. Since I was the coroner and the funeral director, I was there for a while. Much later, when it was time to move Fred to the funeral home, I called Jeff and told him to come to Fred and Wilma's in the hearse. We did the normal things funeral directors do at such times. We eventually moved him over to our cot and put him in the hearse. Wilma had followed us out to the hearse. As Jeff was slowly pulling off in the hearse, Wilma asked me a question. Can I get my money back for that recliner? Although I was not expecting that question, I quickly agreed to refund her money. People had started to gather at the house by then. I was in my pickup truck. She told me she would get one of the men to help me load it on my truck. I told her I didn't want to get the recliner now with a house full of people. I told her just to keep it and I would pick it up after the funeral, but she was afraid somebody would spill something on it. I told her it didn't matter. I would still refund the money. When Wilma came in to make funeral arrangements the next day, we went through the normal entire process. At the end, she asked if I could just deduct the cost of the recliner from the funeral bill. She brought the recliner up several times during the next couple of days. She was so worried someone would spill something on it. A couple of days after the funeral, I went to the house to pick up the register stand and the chairs. There was a lady sitting in the recliner, and I wasn't about to ask her to get up so I could load it on my truck. But Wilma handled that for me. The lady got up, and we loaded the recliner on the back of that truck and took it back to the store and put it back in its place on the floor of my furniture office. As a matter of integrity, we did mark through the price written on the tag and put it at half price. It was not unusual for friends to stop by the furniture store to visit with Jeff and me. When they did that, they would sit in one of the recliners. I remember one friend came in to visit and sat in Fred's chair. After a little conversation, he noticed the price tag on the recliner. Why is this chair half price? He asked. I could not lie. Because Fred died in it last week. Completely astonished, he immediately jumped out of the chair. After a few more days of similar scenarios, I moved it to my house. and I sat in that chair for years. The view from a hearse is different when the view is in a small town.
Viewing life from a hearse, it could be worse. Laugh, think, and cry with the country undertaker.